You can threaten a person with prison, the woman said calmly, but you should never threaten the law. At exactly 8:12 on a gray Monday morning, the east corridor of the Franklin County Courthouse fell silent. Lawyers stopped mid-step. A clerk froze with a stack of folders in her arms. Even the old wall clock seemed louder as its second hand clicked through the stillness. Officer Ryan Mercer stood in the center of the marble hallway, broad shoulders squared, jaw tight, one hand resting near his duty belt as if authority itself lived there. His voice had just carried across 30 feet of polished stone when he told Judge Naomi Ellis that if she interfered one more time, he would personally see her locked in a cell before lunch. No one spoke. No one moved. Because everyone in that corridor understood what had just happened. A uniformed officer had crossed a line most people would never even approach, and he had done it in the one building where lines were supposed to matter. Judge Naomi Ellis did not raise her voice. She did not flinch. She stood beside courtroom 4B in a charcoal suit, one hand resting lightly on a leather case, the other holding a folder thick with documents. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes were steady in the way only practiced strength can be. She had spent 20 years in rooms where men mistook calmness for weakness. She knew the type standing in front of her now. Ryan Mercer was the kind of officer who filled a hallway before he entered it. Tall, polished boots, silver badge catching the fluorescent light, every movement sharpened by habit and ego. He walked like rules bent when he arrived. Around town, people called him effective. Inside the courthouse, people used quieter words. Mercer took one slow step closer. "Did you hear me, Judge?" he asked, stressing the title like it was a joke instead of a fact. "You keep obstructing an active matter, and I'll make sure the paperwork says exactly what I need it to say." A few feet away, Court Clerk Elena Foster lowered her eyes to the floor. Bailiff Daniel Brooks shifted uneasily near the security scanner, but said nothing. In buildings like this, silence often wore a name tag. Naomi glanced once at the folder in her hand, then back at Mercer. "Be careful what you put in writing, officer," she said softly. The words were simple, but something in them caused Daniel Brooks to look up sharply. Mercer only smirked. He thought she was afraid. He thought the stillness around them meant victory. He thought the badge on his chest could drown out every warning in the room. He had no idea that 3 floors above them, a federal prosecutor had just stepped out of an elevator carrying a sealed packet with his name on it. He had no idea that the leather case Naomi held contained months of internal complaints, time-stamped footage, sworn statements, and signatures already approved before sunrise. He had no idea that this hallway confrontation was not the beginning of the story, but the moment it finally surfaced. Mercer leaned in close enough for everyone nearby to hear him. "Last chance," he said. "Walk away, or I end your day myself." Naomi slowly closed the folder in her hands. The sound of paper meeting paper echoed far louder than it should have. Then she looked directly into his eyes and gave the smallest nod, not of surrender, but recognition. Somewhere down the corridor, elevator doors opened. Footsteps approached. And for the first time that morning, Officer Ryan Mercer was no longer the most dangerous person in the building. The footsteps grew louder with measured confidence. Not hurried, not uncertain, but steady in the way only people with authority could move. Every head in the corridor turned toward the far elevator as Assistant United States Attorney Marcus Reed appeared beside 2 investigators in dark suits, each carrying folders marked with government seals. The quiet that followed felt heavier than anything Officer Ryan Mercer had created moments earlier. His smirk held for a second too long before beginning to fade. Marcus Reed was not a man people mistook. In Franklin County, judges respected him, defense attorneys feared him, and city officials learned quickly that excuses sounded weak in his presence. He stopped 10 feet from Naomi Ellis, gave her a slight nod, then looked directly at Mercer. "Officer Mercer," he said, voice level and precise, "you are exactly where I hoped you would be." Mercer straightened immediately. "Counselor," he replied, forcing confidence back into his tone. "This is courthouse business. You can wait." Marcus did not blink. "No," he said. "What happened here became federal business the moment you decided to make it public." Elena Foster lowered the folders in her arms onto a nearby bench, careful not to drop them. Bailiff Daniel Brooks took one slow step away from Mercer, creating distance that everyone noticed. The courthouse had its own language, and distance was one of its clearest words. Naomi remained still beside courtroom 4B, watching the room shift around the man who had believed he controlled it. Mercer laughed once, too loudly. "Let me guess," he said. "Another complaint. Another rumor. Another political show." Marcus opened the top folder in his hand. "Actually," he said, "it is a timeline." He turned one page. Multiple intimidation allegations. Another page. Improper detentions. Another page. Interference with witness access. He turned one more page and closed the file. And now, direct threats issued to a sitting judge in a monitored courthouse corridor at 8:12 this morning. For the first time, Ryan Mercer glanced toward the ceiling cameras. It was a small movement, but everyone saw it. Naomi noticed the change in his breathing before anyone else did. Men like Mercer often believed power was something you wore. They rarely prepared for the moment it became something you lost. "You cannot be serious," Mercer said. "She was obstructing me." Marcus looked at Naomi, then back at Mercer. Judge Ellis was walking to her courtroom, carrying signed orders. He paused just long enough to let the words settle. "Orders concerning requests that involve your conduct." The hallway seemed to narrow around Mercer. He turned sharply toward Naomi. "You set this up." She met his stare without emotion. "No, officer," she said quietly. "You built it yourself. You just needed an audience to see it." One of the investigators stepped forward and handed Marcus a slim envelope. He opened it, reviewed the contents, then spoke with the same calm tone a surgeon might use. Before making an incision, "Effective immediately, your courthouse privileges are suspended pending review. You are instructed to surrender your access credentials and remain available for further inquiry." Mercer stared as if the words had arrived in another language. "You cannot do that in a hallway." Marcus gave the faintest hint of disappointment. "You threatened a judge and won." A few people nearby looked down to hide their reactions. Others did not bother. Elena Foster quietly exhaled. Daniel Brooks removed the temporary security key from Mercer's belt clip without being asked twice. The click of metal sounded louder than any shouting could have. Naomi lifted her folder and stepped toward the courtroom doors. She paused only once. "The law does not move quickly every day," she said, eyes forward. "But when it moves, it remembers everything." Then she entered courtroom 4B, and the doors closed behind her, leaving Ryan Mercer alone in the very hallway where he had expected to be feared. Ryan Mercer remained in the corridor long after the courtroom doors had closed, as if standing still might reverse what had just happened. The fluorescent lights above him hummed with indifferent patience. People who once greeted him with quick nods now moved around him like water around stone. No one wanted to be seen too close to a man whose badge had stopped opening doors. Daniel Brooks handed the clipped access card to one of the investigators and walked away without a word. That silence cut deeper than argument ever could. Mercer looked toward Marcus Reed. "This is temporary," he said, forcing steadiness into a voice that had begun to thin. "You know how this works. Reviews happen. Then people come to their senses." Marcus closed his folder. "Sometimes they do," he replied. "Sometimes they finally do." Then he turned and followed the investigators toward the elevators, leaving Mercer with nothing but polished floors and watching eyes. Inside courtroom 4B, the atmosphere was entirely different. Judge Naomi Ellis took her seat beneath the state seal with the same composed precision she had shown in the hallway. She reviewed the docket, adjusted her glasses, and called the morning calendar to order. No mention of the corridor. No hint of anger. No desire to perform outrage for anyone in the gallery. That was part of what unsettled people most about Naomi Ellis. She never needed emotion to prove strength. Elena Foster resumed her place at the clerk's desk, though her hands still trembled slightly as she organized files. She had worked in the courthouse for 11 years and had seen men like Ryan Mercer rise on confidence, shortcuts, and loud certainty. She had also seen how rarely anyone challenged them. Until now. The first case of the morning involved a landlord dispute, then a probation review, then a licensing appeal. Ordinary matters moved through the room with calm efficiency, yet everyone felt the undercurrent. News traveled fast in public buildings. By 9:05, staff on 3 floors already knew an officer had threatened a judge and walked away without authority. By 9:20, people were adding details they had not witnessed. By 9:30, half the courthouse had decided they always knew Ryan Mercer would fall. That was another habit of institutions. They admired power on Monday and denied knowing it by Tuesday. Across the street, Mercer sat alone in his city-issued sedan, engine off, hands fixed on the steering wheel. He stared at the courthouse steps where he had once climbed with the certainty of a man entering his own territory. His phone buzzed twice. One message from a patrol lieutenant asking for a call. Another from a reporter requesting comment. He ignored both. In the reflection of the windshield, he no longer looked like the center of anything. He looked like a man waiting outside his own life. What unsettled him most was not the suspension. It was Naomi's calm. He had built a career on reading fear in others, on sensing when people would retreat. But in the hallway, she had not retreated. She had measured him. Worse, she had expected him. That thought returned again and again like a splinter he could not remove. Back upstairs, Naomi signed 2 routine orders and then paused over a third file stamped confidential. It contained names, dates, and patterns that stretched further than one officer. She had learned long ago that misconduct was rarely a solo act. It survived through favors, silence, and the comfort of people who said nothing because speaking might cost them. She wrote one final signature at the bottom of the page and slid it into a sealed envelope for Marcus Reed. Elena noticed the motion. "More hearings this afternoon, Your Honor?" she asked carefully. Naomi looked toward the high windows where gray light spilled across the courtroom benches. "No," she said. "Something more useful than hearings." At 10:02, a city internal affairs team entered the building through the west entrance carrying evidence boxes and formal notices. In the parking lot below, Ryan Mercer finally saw them step out of an unmarked vehicle. For the first time that morning, he understood the hallway had not been the end of his problem. It had only been the announcement. At 10:07 in the morning, the west entrance of the Franklin County Courthouse opened again, and this time no one pretended not to notice. 3 internal affairs officers entered in dark suits carrying evidence boxes, sealed envelopes, and the kind of calm expressions that told experienced people something serious had already been decided elsewhere. Word moved through the building faster than elevators. Clerks whispered near copy machines. Deputies checked their phones. Lawyers delayed coffee runs just to remain close to the hallway. In places built on procedure, spectacle was rare. That made it irresistible. Ryan Mercer saw them from the sedan parked across the street and felt a cold pressure settle beneath his ribs. He started the engine, then shut it off. Drove 2 feet, then stopped. For years he had been the one people watched through courthouse windows. Today he was outside looking in. His phone rang again. Lieutenant Harold Denton this time. Ryan let it ring until voicemail answered. Then he stared at the courthouse doors and wondered how many people inside were discussing him by name. The answer was more than he wanted. On the second floor, Judge Naomi Ellis concluded the final case of the morning with measured clarity, thanked counsel, and recessed until 1 o'clock. She rose, gathered her files, and entered chambers without hurry. Elena Foster followed with a stack of folders and closed the door behind them. For a moment, the room was quiet except for the distant hum of ventilation and the faint sounds of courthouse traffic beyond the walls. Naomi removed her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose. "You did not have to stand there this morning," Elena said softly. Naomi looked up. Neither did he. Elena hesitated. Most people would have shouted back. Naomi gave a tired half-smile. Most people are taught anger is the only visible form of strength. She reached for the sealed envelope she had prepared earlier and slid it across the desk. "Please make sure Mr. Reed receives this before noon." Elena glanced at the label and nodded. She had learned not to ask unnecessary questions. Outside in the corridor, Marcus Reed met with the internal affairs team beside an empty conference room. He reviewed a checklist with efficient precision. Access logs, body camera records, prior complaints, supervisory communications, vehicle movement reports, courthouse surveillance from 8 o'clock through 8:30. One investigator, a gray-haired woman named Sandra Vale, looked up from her notes. "He called 3 people already," she said. "Union representative, lieutenant, and someone at City Hall." Marcus did not seem surprised. "Men who rely on influence usually reach for phones before facts," he replied. "Let him keep dialing." At 10:41, Ryan Mercer finally crossed the street and entered the lobby. Conversations thinned as he passed. Security officers who once greeted him with familiar ease now simply watched. He approached the front desk with practiced confidence that almost looked convincing. "I need to speak with internal affairs," he said. The deputy at the desk, young enough to still respect titles, swallowed once before answering. Conference room B, sir. Ryan noticed the pause before sir. Even courtesy had changed tone. As he walked down the corridor, every polished surface seemed to reflect a different version of him. The officer who controlled rooms. The man who could pressure witnesses. The name younger cops borrowed for protection. And now the version heading toward a door where none of those identities would matter. Inside conference room B, Sandra Vale gestured to an empty chair. No one offered coffee. No one smiled. Ryan remained standing. This is political, he said. You know that. Marcus Reed, seated at the far end of the table, folded his hands. No, he said quietly. Political is when consequences depend on popularity. This depends on records. Ryan looked from face to face, searching for the weakness he usually found in others. He found only preparation. Sandra opened the first evidence box. Inside were neatly organized files, labeled by year. She placed one folder in front of him. Then another. Then another. Complaints he thought had vanished. Reports he assumed were buried. Statements he never believed anyone would sign. Ryan's expression tightened with each page. Marcus spoke only once more. You mistook delay for protection. Upstairs in chambers, Naomi Ellis stood by the window overlooking the courthouse steps. She watched people enter and leave beneath a sky beginning to clear. Institutions moved slowly, she knew. But once in motion, they could be impossible to stop. Conference room B had no windows. Yet by noon it felt brighter than the hallway where Ryan Mercer had once towered over people. Brightness does that when illusions begin to fail. The table in front of him was now lined with folders arranged in a clean row, each labeled by date, district, and complaint category. Sandra Vale turned pages with the patience of someone who knew truth did not need drama to be devastating. Marcus Reed sat at the far end of the room, hands folded, saying little because the paperwork was speaking clearly enough. Ryan tried to laugh, but the sound came out thin. Complaints mean nothing, he said. Anyone can file one. Sandra slid another folder forward. That is true, she replied. Which is why patterns matter more than accusations. She opened the file. 3 unrelated citizens. For separate dates. Similar language describing intimidation, selective treatment, and threats delivered where no witnesses were expected. Ryan glanced away. Marcus noticed. There are men who believe fear disappears when the room empties, he said. They forget. Records can wait longer than memory. Ryan straightened in his chair. This is retaliation because I challenged a judge. Marcus looked almost bored. No. This continued because too many people were afraid to challenge you. The words settled like dust over everything Ryan thought he understood. Across the hall, courthouse business continued with practiced rhythm. Phones rang. Printers hummed. Shoes crossed tile floors. Yet everyone knew something larger than routine was happening behind the closed conference room door. Elena Foster delivered filings to chambers and found herself stopped 3 times by staff pretending to ask ordinary questions. Had lunch been delayed? Was the afternoon docket changing? Did Judge Ellis need anything? None of them asked what they really wanted to know. Elena answered each with polite brevity and kept walking. She had learned that people who watched courage from a distance often preferred gossip to gratitude. In chambers, Naomi Ellis reviewed afternoon motions while a cup of untouched coffee cooled beside her hand. Her expression remained composed, but fatigue sat quietly at the corners of her eyes. This morning had not surprised her. It had simply confirmed what she had known for years. Men like Ryan Mercer did not suddenly become reckless. They became comfortable. Comfortable enough to speak carelessly. Comfortable enough to threaten openly. Comfortable enough to believe consequences were for other people. She signed an order, then paused as a memory returned. 7 years earlier, a young public defender had stood in her courtroom trembling after Ryan mocked him in the hallway. 2 years later, a witness recanted testimony after an unexplained visit to her apartment complex. Last winter, a clerk quietly mentioned that certain files always seemed delayed when Mercer's name appeared. Small incidents. Separate on paper. Connected in life. Naomi had kept notes when others chose not to. At 12:18, the conference room door opened for the first time. Ryan stepped into the corridor to make a call, but nearly every nearby conversation stopped when he appeared. He turned away from them and spoke in a low, urgent voice. Harold, listen to me. You need to fix this. He paused, jaw tightening. No, I am not resigning. Another pause. Longer this time. Then get the chief. He ended the call without goodbye. When he looked up, Daniel Brooks was standing 20 feet away near the water fountain. Ryan expected sympathy, or at least familiarity. Daniel offered neither. You could have walked away this morning, Daniel said quietly. Ryan scoffed. From her. Daniel held his gaze. From yourself. Then he turned and entered the stairwell. Ryan remained alone again, carrying a sentence he could not dismiss. Back inside conference room B, Sandra Vale placed one final item on the table. Courthouse surveillance stills from 8/12 that morning. Clear images. Ryan leaning forward. Naomi standing calm. Staff watching in silence. The moment preserved without opinion, stripped of excuses. Marcus tapped the photograph once. This is why today matters, he said. Not because you threatened someone powerful. Because you did it to someone who refused to be moved. Ryan stared at the image as if seeing himself for the first time. Outside, 1 o'clock approached, and the afternoon session of Judge Naomi Ellis was about to begin. At exactly 1 o'clock in the afternoon, courtroom 4B filled faster than it had all year. Some came for scheduled hearings. Others came because institutions attract crowds whenever power changes hands. Lawyers who normally preferred quieter rooms found reasons to linger near the back wall. Deputies stood straighter than usual. Even the public benches, often half empty after lunch, were nearly full. No one said why they were there, but everyone knew. They wanted to see whether the woman threatened that morning would bend, retaliate, or simply continue. Judge Naomi Ellis entered through the side door at 1:03, robe pressed, posture steady, face unreadable. The room rose. She took her seat beneath the seal and called the first case with the same calm cadence she used every day. A custody modification, then a contract dispute, then a sentencing review. Each matter received the same careful attention, as though the morning had never happened. That was what unsettled the room most. Naomi refused to let chaos become the center of her day. She let duty keep that position. In conference room B, Ryan Mercer could hear muffled courthouse movement through the walls, but not enough to identify it. Sandra Vale slid a typed notice across the table. Administrative suspension pending full inquiry, she said. You will surrender departmental property before close of business. Ryan did not touch the paper. This is because of optics, he snapped. Because she is connected. Marcus Reed leaned back slightly. You still misunderstand the room, he said. This is because of evidence. Ryan laughed once in frustration. Everyone loved me when I made arrests. Sandra answered before Marcus could. No. Many people feared you when you made noise. The difference struck harder than Ryan expected. He had spent years confusing attention with respect. Across the courthouse, Elena Foster called the afternoon docket while quietly observing the gallery. She recognized faces from offices that rarely attended proceedings. Supervisors, detectives, staff attorneys. People who once tolerated Ryan Mercer because he was useful now sat pretending they were interested in municipal filings. Elena had seen this pattern before. Institutions often defended a person until the cost became public. Then they discovered principles overnight. During a brief recess, Naomi returned to chambers and found a handwritten note left on her desk by Daniel Brooks. It contained only one sentence. Some of us should have spoken sooner. Naomi read it twice, then placed it inside a drawer instead of throwing it away. Accountability often arrived late, but even late truth had value. She poured fresh coffee, though she still did not drink it. Her reflection in the window looked composed, but beneath that composure lived years of being measured before being heard. Years of watching lesser men treated as natural authority while she was asked to prove credentials already hanging on the wall. Today had not erased those years. It had simply interrupted their pattern. At 2:17, Ryan was escorted to the property office where his service radio, courthouse key card, and department laptop were logged into sealed bags. Each item removed. Some invisible layer of certainty. The clerk handling inventory was young, efficient, and polite. She never once called him officer. Ryan signed the form with a hand that pressed too hard through the paper. When he stepped back into the corridor carrying nothing, he looked lighter in the saddest possible way. News of the suspension spread beyond the building by mid-afternoon. Local reporters gathered on the courthouse lawn. Cameras faced the steps. Phones buzzed in every office. Inside courtroom 4B, Naomi heard none of it. She was listening to a grandmother explain a housing dispute involving broken plumbing and unpaid repairs. Naomi asked precise questions, took notes, and issued a temporary order before moving to the next matter. Justice, she believed, was not only dramatic moments in hallways. It was also ordinary people being heard when no cameras cared. At 3:06, Marcus Reed entered the rear of the courtroom and waited until the current hearing concluded. Naomi looked up. He approached the bench and handed Elena a sealed packet marked urgent. Naomi reviewed the cover page, then the second page beneath it. For the first time all day, something close to surprise crossed her face. She signed once, dated it, and returned the documents. Marcus lowered his voice. "We found who buried the earlier complaints." Naomi closed the file slowly. "Then today was smaller than I thought," she said. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance, and somewhere in the courthouse Ryan Mercer realized the story had just grown beyond him. By 3:30 in the afternoon, rain had begun to tap softly against the courthouse windows, turning the city outside into a blur of gray glass and headlights. Inside Franklin County Courthouse, the air felt sharper than the weather. News crews remained on the lawn. Staff moved in hushed clusters. Every hallway conversation seemed to pause when footsteps approached. The building had become aware of itself, the way institutions do when they realize their private habits may soon become public record. In chambers, Judge Naomi Ellis reread the packet Marcus Reed had delivered. The first pages confirmed what she already suspected: earlier complaints against Ryan Mercer had not disappeared through clerical error or weak evidence. They had been rerouted, delayed, mislabeled, and quietly closed by someone with access and rank. The final page named that person: Captain Leonard Shaw, Professional Standards Division, 26 years on the force, decorated, trusted, frequently quoted about integrity at press conferences. Naomi set the file down carefully. Corruption often survived not through loud men in hallways, but through polished men in offices. Elena Foster stood near the desk, waiting. "Do you need anything, Your Honor?" Naomi looked toward the rain-streaked window. "Yes," she said. A larger room. At 3:47, an emergency administrative hearing was scheduled for 5 o'clock in courtroom 1A, the largest chamber in the building. The official notice used restrained language: review of procedural misconduct allegations and immediate custodial oversight concerns. But everyone understood what it meant. This was no longer about one officer losing control. It was about who had protected him and why. Across the first-floor lobby, Ryan Mercer sat alone on a wooden bench beneath a framed portrait of former judges. His tie was loosened. His phone battery was nearly dead. Calls that once came quickly now went unanswered. He had left messages for Union Counsel, 2 commanders, and Captain Shaw. None had replied. When he finally saw the hearing notice posted near the elevators, his face drained of what confidence remained. Shaw was being named, which meant Shaw might talk. For the first time all day, Ryan understood the structure above him could collapse faster than the ground beneath him. Daniel Brooks approached slowly and stopped a few feet away. "You should get a lawyer," he said. Ryan looked up with tired anger. "You enjoying this?" Daniel shook his head. "No. I am remembering every time people said nothing, because speaking cost too much." He glanced toward the posted notice. The bill came due anyway. He walked off before Ryan could answer. At 4:58, courtroom 1A was standing room only. Attorneys lined the walls. Deputies occupied side aisles. Clerks filled spare seats normally reserved for overflow jurors. Reporters were kept outside, but their presence pressed through the doors like weather. Naomi entered from chambers in black robe and steady stride. The room rose. She took the bench not with triumph, but with discipline. Marcus Reed stood at one table beside Sandra Vale and 2 investigators. At the opposite table sat Captain Leonard Shaw, immaculate in dress uniform, expression composed enough to look practiced. Ryan Mercer was seated behind counsel several rows back, no longer central, yet unable to leave the frame of his own making. Naomi called the matter to order. Marcus began simply. Access logs, reassigned files, deleted routing notes recovered from archived servers. Complaint numbers changed by 1 digit, so they vanished into unrelated categories. Shaw listened without visible reaction until Sandra placed a binder on the evidence screen and opened 2 internal emails. There, in clean official language, were instructions to manage exposure, delay external review, and protect productive personnel. Ryan closed his eyes. Shaw finally spoke. Context matters. Marcus nodded once. It does. He lifted another page. That is why we also have witness statements. One by one, sworn declarations were summarized from clerks, supervisors, and retired staff who described a system where certain names were shielded and certain citizens were dismissed before facts were read. The room grew so quiet that rain against the high windows sounded loud again. Naomi watched Shaw carefully. Then she watched Ryan. One man had hidden behind process, the other behind a badge. Both had mistaken silence for consent. She signed 2 interim orders on the bench, handed them to Elena, and spoke with calm authority. Captain Shaw is placed on immediate administrative leave pending criminal referral. All related complaint closures are reopened effective today. A tremor moved through the courtroom. Ryan stared forward as if movement itself might betray panic. Naomi's gaze settled on him only once. It was not angry. It was worse. It was clear. When Judge Naomi Ellis struck the gavel at 6:02 in the evening, the sound carried through courtroom 1A like a door closing on an era. Rain still traced the tall windows, but inside the room something else had broken open. Captain Leonard Shaw sat rigid at counsel table, immaculate uniform now stripped of its old meaning. Ryan Mercer remained 3 rows behind him, shoulders tight, eyes fixed ahead, as if refusing to look left or right could somehow protect him from what everyone else had already seen. Naomi reviewed the final page before her, then lifted her gaze to the crowded chamber. These proceedings are administrative in nature, she said, voice calm and exact. But administrative misconduct can produce public harm. Therefore, the response must be immediate. No one shifted. No one coughed. Even the deputies along the walls seemed to hold their breath. Marcus Reed rose and submitted a supplemental packet containing newly recovered communications from earlier that afternoon. Archived messages. Call records. Internal notes sent after Ryan's morning confrontation. Several attempts had been made to influence witnesses, shape narratives, and describe the hallway incident as a misunderstanding. The timing of those efforts mattered. They showed that even after exposure, instinct had turned toward concealment. Sandra Vale summarized the findings without flourish. Ryan listened with growing disbelief. He had spent years assuming systems protected themselves first. He never imagined a day when preserving the system would require sacrificing him. Naomi turned one page, then another. Officer Mercer, she said, using the title one last time. You are named directly in multiple reopened matters and indirectly in several more. Your conduct this morning is corroborated by video, witness accounts, and your own subsequent communications. Ryan rose abruptly before counsel could stop him. This is not fair, he said, voice louder than intended. You made up your mind before I walked in. Naomi regarded him steadily. No, she answered. I made up my mind when facts arrived. The room absorbed the sentence in silence. Ryan looked toward Shaw, perhaps expecting rescue, apology, anything. Shaw did not meet his eyes. Men who build ladders from other people often step away when the ladder falls. Naomi signed 3 orders and measured. Sequence. The first referred Captain Shaw for external review and records preservation. The second reopened all previously suppressed complaints tied to identified personnel. The third concerned Ryan Mercer directly. Elena Foster received the papers, stamped them, and handed copies to counsel. The sound of the stamp striking paper echoed with simple finality. Naomi spoke again. Effective immediately, Ryan Mercer is terminated from courthouse assignment eligibility, suspended from active duty pending departmental separation proceedings, and referred for independent review concerning intimidation, misuse of authority, and interference with judicial operations. Ryan stood motionless. He had once used stillness to intimidate rooms. Now stillness was using him. From the gallery came no applause, no cheers, no dramatic reaction. Only a long collective exhale. Justice rarely sounded like celebration. More often it sounded like relief. Daniel Brooks, positioned near the side aisle, watched quietly. Elena lowered her eyes to hide emotion. Marcus Reed simply closed his folder. Naomi's attention returned to Ryan one final time. You believed authority was something you could project, she said. But authority without discipline is only noise. Ryan opened his mouth, then closed it. There are moments when language abandons people who relied on it carelessly. Deputies approached not with spectacle, but procedure, instructing him where to wait and what would happen next. No raised voices. No humiliation performed for the room. The same system he had tried to bend now treated him with the fairness he had denied others. Outside on the courthouse lawn, cameras captured staff exiting beneath umbrellas as word spread through the city in minutes. Inside, courtroom 1A slowly emptied. Papers were gathered. Benches cleared. Footsteps faded. Naomi remained on the bench for a moment after everyone else had begun to move. The rain had started to lighten beyond the windows. She looked at the seal above her head, then at the empty seat where Ryan Mercer had stood. This morning he threatened prison like it was a personal tool. By evening he had learned a harder truth. Careers do not always end in scandalous explosions. Sometimes they end in a quiet room when excuses run out. Night settled over Franklin County in a slow wash of wet pavement, traffic lights, and courthouse windows glowing against the dark. By 8:15, the cameras were gone. The reporters had packed their cables, and the lawn outside had returned to ordinary silence. Inside the building, janitors moved carts through marble corridors where power had argued all day and lost. The floors reflected long lines of fluorescent light, like calm water after a storm. Judge Naomi Ellis remained in chambers with the door half open, reviewing the final paperwork before heading home. Her desk was neat except for one stack of reopened complaint files and a single cold cup of coffee she never touched. Elena Foster knocked softly and stepped in carrying a coat and umbrella. "They are still talking about it downstairs," she said. Naomi signed the last page before looking up. "They were always talking," she replied. "Today they simply chose honesty." Elena smiled faintly. "You changed something." Naomi considered the words for a moment. "No," she said. "Something changed because enough people finally stopped pretending not to see it." She gathered the reopened files into a leather case and stood. Years of discipline showed in the small motions. No wasted movement. No theatrical relief. Victory, when it comes to people who have fought too long, often looks like composure. On the first floor, Daniel Brooks stood near the security desk finishing incident logs. He saw Naomi approach the elevator and straightened immediately. "Good night, Your Honor." She paused. "Good night, Mr. Brooks." He hesitated, then spoke with the careful honesty of a man trying to be better than he had been that morning. "I should have stepped in sooner." Naomi held his gaze without judgment. "Then step in sooner next time." The elevator doors opened. Some lessons did not need more words. Across town, Ryan Mercer sat alone in a small apartment lit only by the blue glow of a muted television. His uniform shirt hung over a kitchen chair. His phone lay face down beside unopened mail. Every few minutes he picked it up, checked for messages, and set it back down. Nothing from commanders. Nothing from old allies. Nothing from the people who once borrowed his confidence whenever it was convenient. He replayed the hallway again and again. Her calm face. His raised voice. The footsteps approaching. He had believed humiliation belonged to others. That assumption was gone now. On the television, a local anchor mentioned administrative reforms, reopened complaints, and public trust. Ryan muted the set completely. For the first time in years, silence was not something he imposed. It was something he had to sit inside. Back at the courthouse, Naomi exited into the cool evening air. Rain had ended, leaving the city washed clean and smelling faintly of asphalt and cedar. Marcus Reed waited near the steps with an umbrella tucked under one arm and a folder under the other. "More names may surface," he said. Naomi nodded. "Then more doors will need opening." Marcus studied her for a second. "You know, most people would have made today about revenge." Naomi looked toward the street where taillights passed like red ribbons through the dark. "Revenge is loud," she said. "Correction is quieter, and it lasts longer." Marcus handed her the folder. Preliminary recommendations for policy changes, complaint tracking, and witness protections. She accepted it with a tired smile. "Tomorrow, then." "Tomorrow," he agreed. They went separate ways down the courthouse steps. Above them, the county seal stood fixed in stone, older than either of them, yet shaped every day by the people beneath it. Naomi walked to her car carrying files heavier than they looked and a piece lighter than it should have been. She knew one day had not cured a system. It had only interrupted one of its habits. But habits matter. They become culture when left unchallenged. She placed the case on the passenger seat, started the engine, and watched the courthouse in the rearview mirror for one final moment. This morning a man had worn authority like armor, and threatened prison as if justice belonged to him. Tonight the building still stood, the law still stood, and he did not. Because power borrowed from fear can vanish in an instant, but dignity, rooted in truth, does not move at all.